Good morning, students. This is Arindam Bagh here, and uh, and today our topic is Hound of Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. So we are going to discuss about the summary, chapter-wise summary of the novel. But before I start, I would like to show you something. This is the analysis we are having here in my YouTube channel, and I was surprised to see that only only 55.6% views are from subscribed peoples, and 44.4 are not are from not subscribed persons. So I'm requesting all of you, please subscribe my channel. Thank you. So let's start the presentation again. So what we have, so in the first chapter we have a glimpse of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in their home, and the office is at 221B Baker Street in London. And Watson examines a mysterious cane which was found in the office. It was left by an unknown visitor. Holmes, he was sitting with his back facing his friend, so Holmes was unable to see what Watson was doing. So, without looking at Watson, he says, "Watson, what he makes of it? What is your analysis after getting this cane?" And Watson, after watching the things closely, he declares that his friend must have eyes in the back of his head. Why he is saying? Because Holmes was not looking at him. He was sitting back. So since he saw what he was doing, so Holmes admits that he saw Watson's reflection in the coffee serving service. There's a pot actually, and it was shiny, so it appears to be like, it behaves like a mirror. Sorry, and Holmes watched Watson through that coffee pot. So proving to Watson and asked that he is an astute observer. Through this, we can easily realize that how strong his observation skill is. And Watson offers up his theory to the origin of the walking state. He declares that there is an inscription, and he reads to James Mortimer, MRCS, from his friends of the CCH. It is, what he said, quote unquote, suggest an elderly fellow doctor who has avoided the object after years of faithful service. Holmes encourages Watson's speculation, and the doctor continues, saying that the well-known stick implies a country practitioner who walks about quite a bit. In addition, the CCH, he suggests that he is probably the mark of the something Hunt, a local group to whom Mortimer provided some service. So Holmes congratulates Watson and goes to examine the cane himself, as Watson basks in the glory of Holmes' compliment. He was happy that he analyzed things properly. However, Holmes quickly contradicts almost all of Watson's conclusion. This is the part of humor actually. First, he congratulated Watson, and Watson was very happy for his own observation and his own what should I say? His own hypothesis, his own decision that this is my observation. But immediately Holmes contradicts almost all of Watson's conclusion. Holmes suggests that while the owner is clearly a country practitioner, it's true, CCH actually means Charing Cross Hospital. The cane was probably presented on the occasion of men's retirement from the hospital, and only young men would have retired from a successful city practice to move to a rural one. Holmes goes on to suggest that the man must possess a small spaniel, given the bite marks on the cane, and he playfully announces, given the appearance of master and dog at their front door. The moment he was discussing about, Dr. Mortimer also arrives, and Holmes successfully announced that also. Mortimer arrives, and he introduces himself and talks to the embarrassed Watson, an ardent phrenologist. Mortimer admires Holmes' skill and announces his desire to consult with the second highest expert in Europe, a moniker which Holmes disputes. So, this is the first chapter we are having. Now, let us move to the analysis part. So, we can see there was an introduction of the character Sherlock Holmes and how sharp his mind is. So, this is a strategy of any detective in any detective fiction. You will find this strategy. That means how good he is at his observation. The detective will be described in such a fashion by the author. And the first chapter is appropriately titled Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The title of the chapter is Mr. Sherlock Holmes. It is rightly because it speaks all about Mr. Sherlock Holmes. That is, as it introduces us to the great detective while describing his abilities and comparing him to Dr. Watson. So, Dr. Watson is like a foil, and Dr. Watson presents that any ordinary person, but in comparison to Sherlock Holmes, we will realize how sharp Sherlock Holmes is. Watson serves as a Holmes chronicler throughout the Sherlock Holmes series, but he doesn't more than that. Watson is a foil of Holmes' brilliance. I told you earlier. As Holmes himself says, in noting your fallacies, I was occasionally guided towards the truth. It is a strange thing, but it is true. Dr. Watson gives Holmes the opportunity to show up to disapprove a plausible but an erroneous set of conclusion by offering a superior talent and observation. Conan Doyle uses the character of Dr. Watson as a stand-in for us, Holmes' credulous readership who connect with Watson both by virtue of his narration and to his common sense analysis of the situation. Holmes will always be able to trump Watson and us, providing more insight, analysis, and cleverness. Holmes always has an insider's edge. Conan Doyle often gives Holmes the advantage because he provides him with more information than we get. When Holmes determines the size and breed of Mortimer's dog, for example, it is because he sees the animals outside the window. Later, when wrapping up the case, Holmes benefits from some secret research he has done on the side. Holmes is supposed to beat us to the punch in every instance. We are all supposed to have the small puzzle pieces, but only Holmes can fit them together. Conan Doyle cheats sometimes, letting Holmes look brilliant when in fact he is just better informed. Gives Holmes privileged information, however, goes toward establishing the depth of Holmes' character. Holmes rub it into Watson and us when he comes up with the correct conclusions, only to reveal that he has knowledge of the most obvious of clues. For example, he had seen the dog or hound outside the office, which is how he knew its breed also. He had seen Watson in the silver coffee service, which is why he knew Watson was inspecting the cane, even though he was not facing him. Holmes is able to play this common observation off as the most uh, brilliant of insights or even as a part of supernatural ability, showing that he is also conceited and egoistical. So, this is the analysis of the chapter 1. So, we are moving to the next part, that will be chapter 2. So, here it is. Now we are moving to the summary of chapter 2, the cards of the Baskervilles. Mortimer presents Holmes and Watson with a manuscript, which the always observant Holmes had already noticed and dated at 1730. It's okay, we found a date. The document dated 1742, Baskerville Hall, reveals the myth of the Baskerville cards. At the time of the Great Revolution, now here we have a part which Mortimer actually reads out. Mortimer reads Hugo Baskerville, lauded over the Baskerville mansion in Devonshire. He was a sex crazed and lecherous. The infamous Hugo became obsessed with a local yeoman's daughter. It is the story we are having here through the words of Mortimer, whom he kidnapped one day, trapped in an upstairs room. Hearing the raucous drinking and carousing going on downstairs, the girl tried to escape with the help of an ivy covered wall. She fled across the expansive moorlands outside. Enraged at finding that his captive escaped, Hugo made a deal with the devil and released his hounds in pursuit of the young girl. Hugo's companions had followed their drunken friend across the moorland, came upon the bodies of both Hugo and his girl. Hugo had just had his throat ripped out by a foul thing. a great black beast, which is later on will be described as the hound of Baskervilles. Ever since, Mortimer reports the supernatural hound was haunted the family, has haunted the family. The hound just recently killed Sir Charles Baskerville, the latest inhabitant of Baskerville Hall. Mortimer unfolds the Devon Country Chronicle of May 14, reading about Sir Charles' philanthropy and the circumstances surrounding his death. Having remade his family fortune in South African colonial ventures, Charles returned 2 years ago to the family estate and gave extensively to the local population. The chronicle also mentioned the myth only to discount it, citing the testimony of Sir Charles' servant, Mr. Barrymore and Mrs. Barrymore. You know who are these characters, I already told you earlier, and that of Mortimer himself. Charles was found dead. The paper reports at the site of his nightly walk down the so called Yo Alley, which borders the haunted moorlands. Suspicious facts include Charles' apparent dawdling at the gate to the alley and his footsteps down the alley itself, which indicated tiptoeing or running. But the paper points out Charles' poor health and the coroner's conclusion that that the man died of a heart attack. The article goes on to insist that the next of kin, Sir Henry Baskerville, should come to take his uncle's post and continue his philanthropy. Mortimer interrupts the account, however, to indicate that those are the publicly known facts. Of the record, he admits that Sir Charles' poor health was the result of his fear and the family curse, and that he himself had suggested a sojourn in London to ease Sir Charles' nerves. Finally, Mortimer announces that the scene and the crime contained, in addition to Sir Charles' tiptoeing steps, the footprints of a gigantic hound. So that is the summary of chapter 2. Now we are moving to the analysis. The Curse of Baskervilles establish many of the themes that will run throughout the rest of the book. The contrasting pair of natural and supernatural, the myth and reality, even as Doyle relates the deeds of a lecherous libertine. In the tradition of Marquis de Sade, he invokes the Gothic tradition that is popular at the time. The ideas of an ancient curse, a hound of hell, and a kind of divine retribution of recall stories like those Edgar Allan Poe, who imagined the most macabre situation and the most otherworldly explanations. This chapter also presents several sources of information about the case. The manuscript, the paper, the Mortimer's reading of each one make it difficult to know which source to believe. An ancient curse, a modern piece of journalism, a doctor's counsel, all conspire to bewilder the detectives and the audience. Ultimately, however, the interplay of multiple perspectives only serves to emphasize the accuracy of our original source of all knowledge. Sherlock Holmes himself, each source is set against the master's logical techniques for gathering and analyzing clues both in form and in function. The manuscript is notable both for its tone, which is radically different from the novel's no nonsense direct tone, and for its content, which points to the easy but unrealistic supernatural answers to a perplexing problem, rather than the more complicated scientific explanation in the final analysis. Holmes is able to glean the valid facts from what would otherwise be a shadowy ancient myth, dating the document at 1730 and analyzing the print and the paper. Holmes brings the elusive myth into his realm by using the careful deductive reasoning. So that is the analysis of chapter 2. We are moving to chapter 3 and 4. So what we have here in chapter 3, the name of the chapter is The Problem. Holmes is excited by such a mysterious case, asks for some more details. As it turns out, the paw print indicated that the dog had not approached the body. High hedges and 2 locked gates bordered the yew alley. Mortimer suggests that the death was the result of some supernatural evil, and he describes his own interviews with locals who had seen a spectral hound roaming the woods. The superstitious Mortimer only came to Holmes to ask what to do with Sir Henry. The Soul said to arrive at Waterloo Station in 1 hour. He mentions another year, that is Sir Charles' brother Roger, but points out that he is presumed dead in South America. As for Sir Henry, Mortimer is afraid should he set up shop in Devonshire, but he knows that the country is counting on continued Baskerville philanthropy. Please excuse me for any background noise. We are staying at home, so many things are going behind me. Holmes promises to consider the matter, telling Mortimer to pick up Henry at the station and bring him to the office the next morning. The detective dismisses Mortimer and Watson and settles down to contemplate the situation, ruminating in his typical fashion over a bag of Bradley's strongest shag tobacco. Later that night, Watson returns to find the office atmosphere thick with smoke, as Holmes suggests a concentrated atmosphere helps the concentration of thought. You will find this image frequently used, that whenever Holmes is he is thinking about something, he is smoking cigars, smoking tobaccos. Holmes surprises Watson by guessing he has been at his club and unveils a map of Baskerville moorlands. Holmes indicates his inclination to go through all the other possibilities before falling back on the supernatural one. He speculates on the relevant questions, given his infirmity and fear of the moor. Holmes wonders whom Charles was waiting for at the gate. The change in footprints, Holmes suggests, indicates running and not tiptoeing. Holmes also points out that Sir Charles was running in exactly the wrong direction, away from his house and any help he might find. The duo sets aside the case and Holmes take up his problem. So that is the end of chapter 3. We are moving to chapter 4. The next morning, Mortimer and the young Henry Baskerville arrived at 221 Baker Street. Though sturdy and weather-beaten, Sir Henry's expression showed that he was a gentleman. Just 24 hours in London, Sir Henry was already gotten involved in the mystery. He received an anonymous note of warning when he arrived at his hotel. Said the note, "As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moors." A few facts stand out. The address is on a plain envelope and printed in rough writing, and the note itself is composed with words cut off a newspaper, except for the word moor. Holmes establishes that no one could have known where to reach Sir Henry, so the writer must be following him. Holmes quickly assesses the typeface and reasons that the words were cut out from yesterday's Times. He goes on to suggest that a culprit used a pair of short-bladed nail scissors, since the longer words are cut into two snips, and that the word moor was handwritten because the author could not find it in print. Astound the others listening on intently, Holmes proceeds, the author must be an educated man, since only the well-educated read the Times. As such, the roughly written address suggests that the writer was trying to disguise his or her handwriting. Thus, the writer must have cursive that is recognizable. In addition, the author must have been in a hurry, since the words are glued carelessly onto the paper. Dr. Mortimer suddenly skeptical questions Holmes' guesswork, and the Holmes retorts that this methodology involves weighting probabilities and deciding on the likeliest solution. To prove it, he points out that the splatter writing suggests a lack of ink, undoubtedly the result of a hotel pen and not a private one. Holmes even asserts that an investigation of hotel garbage around Charing Cross, where the letter was postmarked, should yield the top-ton copy of the Times. So that is the chapter 4, and there is also some development in this part. Announcing that he cannot glean anything else from the letter, the detective asked Henry whether anything else unusual happened, and apparently it was clear that Henry lost a pair of shined shoe, and that was strange. And they decided to visit Baskervilles. The group debates whether the warning suggests a friend eager to protect Baronet or an enemy intent on scaring him off. Henry announces his intention to go to Baskerville Hall. After inviting the detectives to lunch after later that day, he leaves. As soon as Sir Henry and Mortimer are out of door, Holmes leaps into action and intent on trailing the baronet to spot the letter writer, whom Holmes suspects is trailing Sir Henry. Sure enough, the stakeout reveals a suspicious stranger in a cab, and the moment Watson spies his bushy black beard, the villain hurries off. The spy, Holmes suggests, is a worthy rival given his choice of a cab, a supremely well-suited getaway car. Holmes' own performance, by contrast, was superb. He let the spy know that he was seen. The detective announces that he has caught the cab's number 2704 and directs Watson into a nearby messenger office. Once inside, Holmes greets the manager and former client and asks for the man's son, Cartwright's help. Holmes instructs Cartwright to inspect the garbage of all the hotels in the Charing Cross region in search of the mutilated times. Meanwhile, he tells Watson they will investigate cab number 2704 before meeting Sir Henry for lunch. So, in this two chapter, the analysis is in this section. Holmes attacks the case applying his logical methods to the few clues we have. They have his decision to exhaust all real world options before considering the supernatural is typical of Holmes' style. He decides to rule out all the possibilities before he considers that there are supernatural reasons. Ironically, the way that he analyzes clues and the intuition he uses gather evidence is almost supernatural. He is almost superhuman in his observation. Even the mistaken and disguised identities which play a large role in the novel, you will find the villain is in disguise, will continually disguise his own and other identities. This chapter also introduces us to the character of Cartwright. Cartwright offers an interesting glimpse into the mindset of upper middle class England during Holmes' time. So that will be all for today. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share and subscribe my channel and help my channel to grow. Thank you.